Last week, the EPA shut down 8 shops in Atlanta because they were selling illegal pesticides. The same week, a new tariff took effect. It makes every electronic monitoring device in this industry more expensive, permanently, no expiry date. And somewhere in between, a paper started circulating on LinkedIn that argues the framework this whole industry runs on is out of date. 3 separate stories, one thread running through all of them. My name is Konstantin Schwartz. This is Pest Control Unlocked. One note on timing. I'm recording this Monday, 27th of July. Ecolab reports tomorrow morning, Rentokil on Thursday, so nothing here has the benefit of those numbers. Rollins already reported. That was the last episode. As usual, I'm covering macro, levers, and guardrails. Guardrails is the big one today. 4 things moved last week. Thursday, the 24th of July, 1 minute past midnight, the Section 122 surcharge expired. It hit the 150-day statutory limit and died by operation of law. And the same morning, USTR's new Section 301 forced labor tariffs took effect. 2 tiers, 10% and 12.5%, affecting 60 economies, roughly 99% of what America imports. No sunset. This one doesn't expire. Here's the line that matters for us. Chemical and industrial inputs are exempt. Your chemistry is protected. Most important active ingredients are shielded, and the EU carve-out names them explicitly. What isn't exempt? Sprayers, application hardware, plastics, bait stations, vehicles, PPE, and electronic monitoring devices. Much of that comes from China at 12.5%, stacked on the China tariffs that were already there. Allianz now puts the average US import tariff at 12.4%. In May, it was 7.7%. For intermediate goods, the number that matters if you buy products and devices, 15.8%. The second factor revolves around the weather. We experienced the 3rd heat dome in a month. Over 100 million people under alerts. Phoenix hit 117 degrees Fahrenheit on the 24th of July, with an overnight low of 97 degrees Fahrenheit. That ties the warmest night ever recorded there. That matters biologically. Overnight lows above 90 degrees Fahrenheit accelerate cockroach and stored product development and push rodents inwards towards cool, damp buildings. Expect callback volume in food service, healthcare, and multifamily through August. Vectors are running hot too. West Nile at 91 cases, 64 neuroinvasive across 20 states, highest this early since 2004. Tick-related emergency room visits are up 13%, screwworm with 42 U.S. infestations, 41 of them in Texas. Now, I want to be careful here, because it's very easy to talk about a heat wave as a demand driver and lose sight of what it actually is. This month's heat has killed at least 69 people in the US, more than 10,000 succumbed to the heat waves in Europe, and your technicians are working in it. Crawl space and attic work at 110 degrees Fahrenheit is a safety problem first and a productivity problem second. Cal OSHA issued a heat advisory on the 23rd of July. If you haven't moved high heat work to early mornings, do it this week. It's not worth the extra hour. The third factor is around labor. Roughly 350,000 people are losing their work authorization right about now. Right about now is deliberate. This isn't a clean single-day cliff. The Supreme Court cleared the way in June, but the terminations depend on district courts issuing orders, and the date keeps moving by days at a time. Some holders have other applications pending. Treat it as a rolling loss over several weeks. Another 170,000 or so Salvadorans run to 9th of September. And prevailing wages rose a median of 3.3% on the 1st of July. That's a direct hit to your technician and warehouse hiring pool. There's also second-order effect people miss. Labor-constrained restaurants and hotels cut service frequency first. Your customer staffing problem becomes your revenue problem 1 quarter later. And you can take a note of this. June headline CPI dropped 0.4% month on month. Annual inflation dropped to 3.5%. Looks like disinflation. It isn't. That was gasoline, down 9.7% in the month. Core producer prices are still running at 5.1%. CPI is what your customer reads in the paper. PPI is what you actually pay for chemicals, equipment, vehicles, and insurance. My take on this, if you're writing price increase letters this quarter and you're justifying them on CPI, you will under-recover in a year when your input costs are rising at 5%. Price on PPI. Show the customer the input basket, not the headline. Now let's take a look at what the industry is doing about all of that. Rollins reported on the 22nd of July. I did the full numbers last episode. Margin down 110 basis points, guidance cut, stock off as much as 14.3%. That's the part I want to pull forward. The segments. Commercial pest control grew 7.2% organic, termite grew 8.9%. Residential grew 3.6%. Commercial is running at double residential's organic rate. And listen to what management said about why. The weakness sat in brands that depend on what they call consumer-initiated demand. Search, digital media, inbound calls. Lead volume fell. The relationship channels, home builders and door-to-door, held up fine. So this isn't a pest demand problem. People still have pests. It's a customer acquisition problem in a search funnel that's changing underneath everyone. If you sell residential through paid and organic search, look very hard at what AI search is doing to your lead volume right now. What that means, you should be doing 3 moves. With West Nile at 2004 levels, hospitality, senior living, healthcare campuses, and events venues get receptive to mosquito programs mid-season in a way they normally aren't. Clearest revenue opportunity on the board this month, and one of the few where commercial case and the public health case point the same way, is that mosquito control works. The industry already voting with its wallet. Clement Spot knockout mosquito misting on the 21st of July. Multifamily starts jumped 76.3% in June. Industrial vacancy fell below 7%. Meanwhile, 8,171 restaurants closed in the first half of the year, about 1,039 of those in Texas. Multifamily is recurring revenue, high service frequency, structurally higher pest pressure. Restaurants are a shrinking denominator with rising credit risk. Move your effort accordingly and tighten terms on independent and franchisee-owned accounts. Also take a look at the Aruza deal structure. They bought the Charleston operations of Core Pest Solutions, one metro, not the entire company. Sellers keeping their core markets and monetizing the outliers. If financing stays expensive, expect more of that shape. The take here is that contract revenue is proving defensive. Consumer-initiated revenue is not. If your back half growth plan depends on residential search leads, rebuild it around commercial contracts and mid-season vector ads. Now to the main event. There's a white paper circulating called From Pest Control 1.0 to IPM 3.0. It's by Christopher Harkins. I found it on a LinkedIn post, and I'd encourage you to go and read the whole thing. 2 things you should know up front. First, Chris is explicit in the paper that this is his personal view, written independently, and not the position of an employer, customer, or partner. He put that disclosure in himself. I'm reading it out because it's the honest framing. Second, he calls it a starting framework for industry discussion. He is not claiming to have written a standard. I'm going to push on some things later, and I want that context to sit properly. He's inviting the discussion. His credibility here is field-earned, and he's tested the hardware. BellIQ, Bayer's rodent monitoring system, which became part of Envu, Victor V-Link, Skyhawk Kiwi, Spotter's bedbug monitors. This isn't a consultant's thought piece. The core of the paper is a 4-era framework. And the thing that makes it work is that each era gets a defining question. Pre-IPM, up to 1950, the question was, how do we remove, kill, or suppress pests? IPM 1.0, roughly 1950 to 2015. The question became, how do we manage pests responsibly? IPM 2.0, 2016 to 2030. The question is, how do we predict and prevent pest risk? IPM 3.0, 2031 to 2050. How do we make pest risk part of a larger system of environmental and operational intelligence? He compresses that into 2 sentences that I think are the best lines in the paper. The old question, what pest did we find and what treatment should we apply? The new question, what conditions are increasing risk? Where is risk emerging? How confident are we? And what is the earliest responsible intervention? That's the whole argument and one swap. For IPM 2.0, he proposes an operation model he calls SPARK. Sense, predict, act, record, know. Sense, gather information more often from inspections, monitoring, sensors, work orders, sanitation observations. Predict, turn raw activity into risk signals. Act, take the earliest responsible action. Record, document the signal, the decision, the action, and the measurable result, not just a service note. Turn the record into knowledge that changes the next decision. I want to be careful with the naming. He flags in the paper that Spark is proposed and that it may need trademark review if it ever becomes a branded identifier. Here's the most useful thing in the paper, and if you take one thing away, take this. He gives 7 criteria for when technology actually counts as an improvement to IPM. Technology qualifies only if it does at least one of these. You can find risk earlier. It reduces uncertainty. It improves intervention timing. It reduces unnecessary pesticide use. It improves documentation and accountability. It improves safety. It creates a feedback loop that improves future decisions. Next time a vendor pitches you anything, hold it against that list. If it doesn't do any of the 7, it's a gadget. And credit where it's due. This is a paper arguing for monitoring that refuses to become a brochure for monitoring. His own line, a sensor without interpretation is only a signal. A dashboard without accountability is only a display. Everything up to here is Harkins. What follows is me picking it up. I want to be careful about how I frame this next part. Chris wrote a framework paper and put for industry discussion on the cover. He's not claiming to have written a standard. He's explicit that this is a starting point, and he's asking the rest of us to take it somewhere. So what follows is me taking him up on the offer. 3 questions his paper opens, and my attempt at answering them from a different angle than his. He is a field practitioner who has tested his hardware for a decade. I'm a strategist who looks at numbers, different jobs, and I think the second one is the piece that has to come next. If we go back and recall Chris's 4-era table for a second and look at the last column, the measure of value, pre-IPM, it was around mortality and visible control. IPM 1.0, reduced risk, lower pesticide dependence and compliance. IPM 2.0 revolved around verified prevention and measurable risk reduction. IPM 3.0 is about predictive resilience across facilities, food safety, public health, and ecosystem. Notice what is not in that column, and that is cost. And that's correct, because IPM has never been a cost framework. It's a risk framework. It came out of entomology, not accounting. So when we argue about connected monitoring, we shouldn't be arguing about payback periods either. We should be arguing on IPM's own terms, which are these. Can you see a problem developing before it becomes an infestation? Can you forecast pressure instead of reacting to it? Can you put down less toxicant because you know where the activity actually is instead of baiting everything on a schedule? And do fewer non-target animals get poisoned as a result? That last one is not a soft benefit. European studies put rodenticide exposure in fox populations somewhere between 45 to 77% depending on location. Secondary poisoning is one of the main reasons regulators are closing in on anticoagulants in the first place, like in California, for example. And this connects to something Chris makes a great deal of in the paper, the shrinking chemical toolbox. Chlorpyrifos, neonicotinoids, underpollinator review. The PFOS classification fight, we covered PFOS in an earlier episode. Fewer molecules, more scrutiny on the ones that survive. If you have fewer tools, every application has to count for more. That is the actual argument for sensing. Not that it saves you money, but that it lets you do more with a smaller and more contested chemistry set. So here's my question. If that's the benefit case, where's the evidence? Nobody in this industry publishes active ingredient applied per account. Nobody publishes interventions avoided. We claim verified prevention as the value proposition, and then we don't verify it. It's a challenge to the rest of us for not measuring the thing we say we're selling. With the new tariff structure, the federal government has just made the chemistry first model cheaper than the monitoring first model and made that permanent in the same week this paper started circulating. That doesn't change what the right answer is. It does change how expensive it is to get there. Everything I've said so far is from the operator's side. Our margins, our device counts, our compliance. But we don't carry the risk. The customer does. Nobody buys pest control. They buy the absence of a catastrophe. A food safety manager doesn't want visits. They don't want to be on social media. They don't want to fail the audit. And they want to keep the line running. Now look at what's actually on the contract. Visits per month, devices installed, reports filed. That's Chris's criticism one level deeper. Programs measure activity instead of risk reduction. And the reason they do is that risk reduction has never been something you could buy. You cannot write a contract for a lower probability of a rodent in the lobby. Nobody can price it, and nobody can prove it was delivered. Here's the scale of what the customer is insuring against. Taco Bell traffic fell by 18.9% in a single day. That wasn't even a pest event. It was cyclospora on lettuce. But it's the same shape. One contamination story, one day, a fifth of the traffic is gone. An audit failure is not an inconvenience. Lose a GFSI certification and you can lose the right to supply at all. So here's the problem. Think about who wins when a problem gets caught early. The customer does. Their audit stays clean, their brand stays intact, their line keeps running. Now, think about who has to pay the sensor that caught it. The operator does. The money comes out of one pocket. The benefit lands in another. That's why this stalls. Not because the industry is slow, because the business case sits with the wrong party. And there's one more layer, which I think is the part that actually matters. Think about who is in the room when the contract gets signed. Management protects the brand. Facilities protects production. Both of them want risk reduction. That is generally what they worry about. But neither of them signs the contract. Procurement does. And procurement's job is not to protect the brand or the line. It's to make competing bids comparable so the decision can be defended. That needs a common spec. And the only common spec in this industry is visits per month and devices installed, because that's the one thing every bidder can quote against. Procurement isn't the villain here. Given a spec that says 12 services a year and 40 stations, picking the lowest compliant bidder is exactly the right call. The problem is the spec. It's an IPM 1.0 document. It measures activity. And this ties straight back to the denominators. Procurement can't compare monitoring coverage between suppliers because there's no agreed definition of what coverage means. So the monitoring claims aren't scorable and the visit counts are. They score what they can score, which means the missing metric doesn't just make investor reporting messy, it actively pushes procurement to buy on price. So if you want this to change, don't try to persuade anyone. You will never argue your way past a tender document. Change the spec. Whoever writes the spec decides what this industry sells. The way to fix that is Chris's outcome-based contracts idea. It's one line in his paper and it deserves a chapter. By the paper's own dates, IPM 2.0 runs 2016 to 2030. We're 10 years into a 15-year era. So where actually are we? Let's count the devices. Anticimex, 601,000 smart devices at the end of 2025, up from 517,000 the year before. Ecolab, around 600,000 active units with a stated target of 1 million by the end of this year. Rentokil, around 600,000 units out. Three of the largest operators in the world, all at roughly the same number. And I want you to notice what's missing. The denominator. On its own, a device count tells you nothing. 600,000 units across Ecolab's concentrated commercial and food facility base is a completely different level of coverage from 600,000 across Rentokil's global book. Both sound identical in a press release. They are not remotely the same thing. Now, to be fair, the denominators aren't entirely absent. They're just not comparable. Anticimex publishes 13% of their total contract portfolio. Rentokil, in a March 2026 presentation, gave coverage figures too, but for their commercial pest portfolio by country market. Ecolab gives you units and a target, and no denominator at all. So we have three companies, three different definitions, and no way to put them side by side. Is Ecolab ahead of Rentokil? You cannot answer that from the published data. Nor can I. And I don't think that's anyone acting in bad faith. Each of those figures make perfect sense inside the company that publishes it. The problem is that there's no great definition of what connected coverage even means in this industry, so none of it adds up across the three. That isn't a disclosure problem, it's a standards problem. Now, here's what I actually want to say about this, and it's not really about any one company. Go back to Chris's paper. His central criticism of IPM 1.0 is that programs measure the number of devices, visits, bait placements, and reports instead of measuring verified reduction in risk. He's describing what happens in the field. But look at what we just did. 3 companies, 3 device counts, no outcome measure, no coverage measure, no risk measure. The industry's own investor reporting has exactly the disease the paper diagnoses in field practice. We are counting devices the way an IPM 1.0 program counts visits. So the interesting question is not what IPM 3.0 looks like in 2040. It's why IPM 2.0 stalled, and whether anyone can tell you if it has, because nobody publishes the number that prove it either way. And there's an uncomfortable answer available. Maybe it's stalled because the economics genuinely aren't there at current hardware costs. Maybe the industry isn't slow. Maybe it's right. Hold that thought, because there is one place where it didn't stall at all. Here's a question the paper hands straight to the rest of us. Chris doesn't nominate anyone to adopt a revised IPM. He shouldn't. A framework paper that also appointed its own adopter would be overreaching, and he's careful not to do. But the question sits there once you've read it. If this is the direction, who actually makes it happen? So look at how IPM 1.0 became the standard in the first place. It wasn't because someone wrote a good paper. Stern and colleagues published the integrated control concept in Hilgardia in 1959. That's the science. Silent Spring came in 1962. That's the public and political pressure. Then EPA dropped the language and built guidance around it. That's the adopter. And only then did it reach field practice. 4 stages, a framework, evidence, an adopter, and enforcement. Chris has done stage 1 and done it properly. Stage 2 is partly there. The field evidence exists. It's just scattered across companies that measure differently. Stages 3 and 4 haven't started. That's not a shortcoming of the paper. That's the work the paper is asking for. So who could actually adopt it? Everyone assumes the EPA. I think the EPA is the least likely mover. The EPA regulates pesticides and labels. It doesn't certify service programs. And right now, it's consumed by the MyPest migration and the label preemption fight. I think the real leverage is with the audit schemes. Think about why. They already write pest management requirements. They already audit against them. They revise on a published cycle measured in months. And compliance isn't optional for anyone selling into food retail. Most pest management clauses today specify inspection frequency, a device count, and a visit cadence. That's an IPM 1.0 construct. It measures activity, not risk. Change that clause and you change operator behavior inside a single audit cycle. And look at the timing. FSMA 204 traceability has been pushed out to July 2028. Meanwhile, we've just had the largest recorded cyclosporiasis outbreak in the U.S. history. Nearly 2,000 confirmed outbreak cases, 98 hospitalizations, 9 states. Taco Bell traffic fell 18.9% in a single day. The federal regulator has stepped back and the audit schemes are stepping forward. That's where standards are being set right now. There are 2 other routes worth naming. Large customers. If 5 national accounts wrote monitoring and outcome verification into their RFPs, every national operator would comply inside a contract cycle. Blunt, but it works. And an accredited consensus standard through ANSI or ASTM? That's slow, several years, but it's a durable answer. And it's what a regulator can point to later rather than having to write themselves. Almost nobody in this industry talks about that route. Now, I said hold that thought about IPM 2.0 stalling. Here's why. There's one market where it did not stall. Rentokil, in a presentation from March 2026, said that over 50% of their commercial pest portfolio in the Netherlands is connected, and across 14 other international markets, over 10%. Think about that for a second. Same company, same technology, same commercial model, same sales force incentives, roughly 5 times the penetration in one country. So what is different about the Netherlands? Not the technology, not the customer. It's the rule. The Dutch regulator built its entire rodenticide framework around IPM. Before you can reach for an anticoagulant, you have to have done the preventive work first. Remove the food sources, close the harborage, and monitor the population. Rodenticide is the last resort, and you have to be able to show you're working. That came in for outdoor rat control in 2017 and extended to all rat and mouse control indoors and out in 2023. And you can only do any of it if you are certified. That is not a technology mandate. Nowhere does it say install sensors. It's a rule that makes monitoring the compliance path, and digital monitoring turns out to be the cheapest and fastest way to comply with it. So the Dutch never had to make a business case for connected devices. The rule made the business case. This matters enormously because it means we are not speculating about whether a mechanism would work. Somebody already ran the experiment. One market, one regulatory change, and the same company moved 5 times further than it has anywhere else. And it reframes everything. The reason penetration is low in the other 14 markets is not that the operators are slow, or that the technology doesn't work, or that the customers are stubborn. It's that nowhere else has made monitoring the path of least compliance resistance. Change the rule and the adoption curve takes care of itself. So here's my proposal, and I've deliberately made it small. Do not try to redefine IPM. Definitional overhauls take a decade and die in committees. Instead, get an audit scheme to accept continuous monitoring data in place of a prescribed inspection frequency, with documented corrective action and time from alert to resolution as the verification standard. One scheme, one clause. That's small enough to be achievable, specific enough to argue with, and if it works in one scheme, the others will follow. The definitional question then answers itself downstream, which is the order these things actually happen in. So let me make the counter case properly. Alert fatigue is real and under discuss. A device that generates false positives costs you technician hours you don't have. Binding constraint on outcomes might not be detection at all. It might be sanitation compliance and technician labor, and no sensor fixes either of those. Customers have consistently declined to pay for prevention they cannot see. That's not irrationality. That's a genuine measurement problem the industry has never solved. And the 13% number cuts both ways. It might mean the industry is slow. It might mean the value proposition isn't there yet. If you think that's the stronger argument, I want to hear it. That's the point of the episode. Last thing, and this is an angle the paper doesn't cover, though the timing explains why. Chris's sources date to just before this happened. In June, the Supreme Court ruled in Monsanto versus Darnell that FIFRA preempts state failure to warn claims, 7-2, that overturned a $1.25 million Missouri verdict. On the 21st of July, Representatives Luna and DeLauro introduced a bill to strip that preemption back out. It would apply to pending and future cases, including ones on appeal. The second bill on this theme in 2 weeks, and it's bipartisan, which raises the odds of it moving. If that shield goes, then documentation of what was sensed, why intervention was justified, and what alternatives were considered stops being an audit nicety. It becomes a legal defense. Chris makes the case for the record on quality and audit grounds, and he's right to do so. I'd just add that there may be a harder-edged reason coming behind it, and if I'm reading the direction correctly, it's worth thinking about before it arrives rather than after. 3 calls on the record before the numbers land. 1. The most useful conversation this industry can have right now isn't about what IPM 3.0 looks like in 2040. It's about finishing IPM 2.0, which by the paper's own calendar has 4 years left to run, and which on the only published coverage figures we have is still early days. 2. I do expect Ecolab tomorrow to give a portfolio coverage figure for North America. Not how many units do you have out. The question should be what proportion of your North American contract portfolio is on the platform, and what was it a year ago. 3. I don't think the thing that finally moves this will be a better sensor. I think it'll be the first time an operator is asked in a legal setting to show not that a visit happened, but why a decision was made, and finds the record doesn't go that far. Now, there are 3 asks. First, go out and read the paper. Chris Harkins has asked for an industry discussion, and everything I've said in the second half of this episode is me taking him up on it. You can find his paper on LinkedIn under Chris Harkins. Second, Chris, if you're listening, you've built the framework. I think what has to come next is the evidence base and the adoption mechanism. Proving the benefit in numbers and working out who ratifies it. I'd rather build that with you than commentate on it from the outside. So the offer is open, and there's a standing invitation to come on the show and tell me where I've got it wrong. I suspect you'll have a better answer than I do on at least 2 of the 3 questions I just raised. And the third point, and this is the one I really want from everyone else listening. If you sit on a technical committee at any audit scheme, I'd like to talk to you. And if you have ever tried to get continuous monitoring data accepted in an audit and been told, no, I want that story, I don't think anyone has collected them. And I think that's the actual evidence base this discussion is missing. So Ecolab reports tomorrow morning, Renticle on Thursday. I'll have an episode on each, and then I'll put all 3 side by side. I'm Konstantin Schwartz. This is Pest Control Unlocked. Thank you very much for listening.